Hi, and welcome to another episode of eCom at One. And today's guest is Felicity Adkins. Now, Flick is the business director at Tonic, a materials plus company. How are you doing, Flick? Are you okay?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you?
I'm really well. Very good. Very, very good. So I think let's get straight into it. So how did you become the business director at Tonic? And what does that involve? And what did Tonic do?
Cool. Going straight into the deep end. I love it. So I guess it's a bit of an interesting story for me if I kind of cast back a couple of years to begin with. I did a communication and media degree at university and had absolutely no idea what I wanted to go into, but was quite interested in kind of advertising and publishing at the time. Left it really late to find a placement, so late that the only kind of placement available on my student portal was actually a small boutique market research firm in London called Work Research. So I applied for the role, got it. And when I say boutique, there were literally two other full-time members of staff, one of whom was kind of the office manager or the admin assistant, and the other was the CEO. So I was working directly under him and was kind of thrust into this world of qualitative research, which was nothing I'd kind of ever experienced before or even heard of, if I'm honest. And I quickly learned that it was this weird, wacky world where I got to go into people's homes and talk to them about all kinds of things. And I was just absolutely fascinated by it. So that was my kind of initial start in the world of research. They offered me a full-time job when I graduated, which I took. And I ended up working with them for about 10 months before they decided to pack up shop and move on to something different. So sadly was made redundant at my first graduate job, but I ended up joining Tonic, which was the kind of baby of a merger at the time. And I've been there for the last 6 years, and I am now a business director at Tonic. So what that means is that essentially 70% of my time roughly is spent writing proposals and answering briefs that my clients send me, generating new business leads, essentially bringing in business for the company. And about 30% of my time is spent actually working on projects, so the projects that I sell. So I work on them from more of a strategic place, so I'll oversee, key documents that go out the door, help kind of synthesize the team's thoughts, help them with, any stage of analysis and reporting where it's needed. So that's a still really nice part of my role, I guess, that I miss from back in the day when I was actually quite hands-on with the research. But that's more or less been my journey in 7 years.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you say research, for the guys that are listening into the podcast, maybe give us an example of, if you can, to a certain degree, of some of the research and some of the projects you work on.
Of course, yeah. So I guess for anyone listening who doesn't know what market research is, hopefully I'm not teaching anyone to suck eggs. There are essentially two main types of market research. There's quantitative and there's qualitative research. Quantitative research involves people kind of going through large amounts of data sets, essentially, and looking at really kind of complex types of mathematic in a way. So things conjoint analysis or segmentation. I have the utmost respect for quantitative researchers because that is not a strength of mine. I'm very much a qualitative researcher, and what that means is that I spend a lot of time understanding the whys behind the data. So data is wonderful. We definitely live in a data-driven world. All brands have access to large amounts of data, and I help clients understand what some of those percentages mean at a more kind of human level.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Obviously, we deal with a lot of data in the ecom world, in agency world, and obviously there's that many reports that we can send and that much data, and there you go, you've got this. But what does it actually mean, and what can we action from that, and what can we do with that? I think that's where most people get bogged down, don't they? I think we see a lot of clients that they've got this 40-page report that maybe they got from their old agency, or it's 40, and it's like, well, what does it mean? Oh, we don't really look at it. It's just like it just ticks the box, But what is the sort of actions from it? What does it actually mean? I think is usually the bit that quite often gets missed.
Exactly. And for me, I think one of the things that I love most about research and why I'm so passionate about the value of qual is it's fundamentally the human truths that create those connections between brands and consumers. It's what brands build meaningful stories off of the back of. It's how they sell their products in meaningful ways. And we definitely, over the last, 5 years at least have seen a real shift towards people connecting with brands that tell stories.
Yeah.
People root for the underdogs. They love brands like Lucy and Yak, who stand for something and who believe in something, and they love, you know, Ella's Kitchen because she's constantly at the front of all of their comms. And there's a real shift in the way that consumers fundamentally now shop, and I think so much of that is driven in the way that a brand tells their story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more now than ever, I think. So for the guys that are listening in, what would you say would be a good place for them to maybe start implementing sort of a research project?
From a client perspective?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess the main thing for me would be to start really at the drawing board. So I would ask them how much research they have in-house already, whether they've ever done any types of research. And if they have never started doing any type of research, I would always start with the consumer.
Yeah.
I think you need to look at your brand strategy before anything else. You need to establish what your lighthouse identity is. So what do you really stand for? How are you going to communicate that? How do you separate yourself from your competitors? What is that truth that people are buying into? And then from a consumer perspective, who are your consumers? You know, where do they live? Where are you advertising? How are you advertising to them? What channels do they exist on? What are the types of messages that they believe in? Where do they shop? How do they feel when they see your brand name? Is it a name that resonates? Do people easily understand it? What's your packaging like? You can see how quickly these questions begin to roll off the tongue, because I honestly wholeheartedly believe that if you launch a brand before doing any type of research, you're making a massive mistake.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't mean that you have to hire someone like me at an agency where we obviously have quite high fees. You could, you know, try to do some of that research yourself. Obviously there's a skill to moderating, and there's a skill to designing research and asking the right types of questions, but there are definitely some, you know, 2 to 3 questions you could ask initially, which is, you know, how do they feel about what I'm selling them? What do they believe in? And does it resonate with them?
Yeah, fantastic. So if somebody did want to maybe start in your industry, any tips you would give them for getting a foothold in your industry and starting a career in your industry?
Definitely. I guess one funny thing about research is you might often hear people in research say that they fell into it. And I think it's because no one really at university ever really understands what research is, unless you kind of work in strategic planning and advertising, or, you know, you've done a bit of research for your dissertation. A lot of people don't really understand it as even being a career option. So I would say, don't be afraid of what your background is. We have people from all walks of life at our agency. We've got people who, you know, did English literature, geography, anthropology, psychology.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're quite analytical and, you know, you really like math, you've done economics, you could look at doing quantitative research as well. So I would say take the time to assess what your strengths are. Have a think about what really energizes you. Are you energized by the idea of finding insights through numbers, or do you feel like you want to tap more into more of your kind of people skills or your soft skills and speak to people in home and do more face-to-face stuff? And then make a decision, because you can either go down a qual or a quant route. You could do a mixed approach where you join an agency and there's a position like that available. Tonic is part of Material Plus. We've recently rebranded. We were part of the LRW group before, and they are essentially a full service agency. So we within Material Plus have everyone from the beginning of the process, from research all the way through to kind of branding and an advertising agency as well. So there are lots of big agencies out there where you can have real opportunity to kind of jump around and explore.
That's always good, isn't it? Some of the bigger firms where you've got, obviously you're not just stuck potentially in one area that you might find that you don't like. You know, you've got an option to obviously show you're a culture fit, show your passion, show that you're smart and that you want to work hard and you're very interested. However, you might just want to pivot slightly into one of the specific areas, and that's always good. I think if obviously you want to stay in an industry, I think it's an exceptionally good idea to have a very strong understanding of the whole piece. But obviously then you've got your spike, your area of expertise that you've got more passion about and more, you're more interested in pursuing as a career.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have to say, I've obviously been agency side my whole career, but there's a real kind of beauty in starting out agency side, because you are so exposed to so many different types of research and also different categories. I've worked with brands ranging from, kind of pets insurance through to food and alcohol and airlines and cars and beauty and fashion. And I think when you find a category that really kind of grips you, that's the time to then move to client side. And, that's not saying that I haven't found a category I love. It's probably I just love too many categories.
That brings us on, I think, quite nicely to my next question. So obviously a lot of different projects, a lot of different clients, a lot of different verticals. Any sort of tips for success, things that have gone well and why they've gone well, sort of at certain areas that you could share that might help people that are listening in, that are looking at research projects, or maybe engaging a research company to do work. Any particular tips that you would give that are going to mean they might avoid a few things that might potentially be problematic?
I guess for me, the number one thing working as a supplier essentially is one of the big challenges I find with people who aren't used to kind of commissioning research is the actual brief itself can be quite vague, and if it's not vague, then it's broad. And one of the problems with starting really broad is it has the insights have the ability to go anywhere and everywhere. And it's not to say that they don't exist and that we can't do that, but sometimes honing in on one very specific issue is much more impactful, because the level of depth of insight that you'd get from that relative to I don't know, asking lots of questions in different kind of pockets of challenges, I think is just it's much more efficient essentially from a budget perspective, but also from an insight perspective. So make sure that the people who you partner with are open to helping you write that brief. Funnily enough, I had a call with a client the other day, and she's new to client side and she's never written a brief for a supplier before. And I pulled together a document and I was like, hey, look, here are the kind of 20 things I would make sure that for a brief this size, we're talking about £500,000. Here are the things you want to make sure you're including when you brief this out. And here's, where you should really be looking for agencies to differentiate themselves. And I think that, I guess from a researcher's perspective, that would probably be one of my tips for success in a way. And that for me is really kind of fostering strong client relationships.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm of the firm, belief that what you give is what you get, and I will go above and beyond for my clients. To the point where I have clients who will only work with me, and I think there's a real kind of vulnerability there from the both of us, where they might have an issue, or something might arise where they just don't know how to answer it. And similarly, I might not have the context I need when it comes to reporting for a particular insight, and I might say to them, has this ever come up before? I want to make sure when we deliver this insight for you that it resonates with I think how conversations have moved on within your organization since you briefed this to us 6 months ago. And I think having permission and giving yourself permission to go there is what builds these really strong relationships, and it's what shifts me from being a supplier to being a consultant essentially.
Yeah, I think that should very much resonate with a lot of our listeners, that a lot of them are e-commerce stores predominantly, but ultimately they're working with an array of partner, whether that's research agencies in a small part, I'm sure, but obviously they're different agencies and different partners and trusted advisors that they work with. If that comms is there at the front end, especially, and throughout, it's a two-way process, relationships usually last a lot longer, and more importantly, projects are a lot more successful. So I think that's a really, really good takeaway. So what, obviously quite an interesting 6-7 months, I lose track, it's like 8 months, 6 months, 2 years, it feels like 5 years, but interesting last sort of 6 months. Have you seen any specific consumer behavior changes in the last 6 months from your perspective?
No small question there.
This is a bit of, I should have probably changed the question really, but yeah,
I mean, what an absolutely mental time it's been. I still think I reflect back on the beginning of this period when we were going into lockdown in the UK, and me just feeling so naive, I guess, in a way, thinking we'd be out of it in 6 weeks, not really
you and everybody else.
Not realizing like the kind of scope of it. And I think we immediately kind of created these pulse trackers for a lot of our long-term clients, where we spoke to across their kind of core markets up to roughly 40 people on a weekly basis. And what we did was we actually tracked their sentiment throughout the initial pandemic period,
Yeah.
before lockdown was lifted. And it was absolutely fascinating seeing how people's emotions were changing, and how, you know, what was being said in the news within their markets was impacting that, and how their behaviors were changing as a result of that. And that was across several categories. And I think, if I think about it now, obviously won't come as a surprise to you, being in e-commerce, but one of the biggest things we saw was obviously a shift to online, from where, you know, people were advertising, but also how consumers were spending. And it was forcing demographics, people like my mum, who's in her kind of late 60s, to shop online.
Yeah.
She's not a massive fan of shopping online. My grandma, who is turning 90 this year,
Oh,
is
wow.
now obsessed with doing an online shop. And previously going to the supermarket was a bit of a ritual for her. It was kind of her time out of the house. And now she loves this idea of having a weekly delivery from Sainsbury's. And so I think that for me is one behavior to watch. You know, moving forward, are we going to see mobile completely replace cash? Is
Yeah.
cash going to be something that we even
That's quite a
continue?
scary thought, isn't it? I think, you know, I think I'm definitely of the era. I'm not that old, but, you know, a little bit of cash, you know, and the thought, you know, just certain things that you just do with cash and you like to have for cash, you know, you just, oh,
Exactly. And now everywhere I'm used to spending cash, they
yeah,
say to me, we're not taking it. And I'm like, God, okay, let me get my phone out, or let me pay on Apple Pay. And it's those types of digital behaviors that I think will kind of be around for the long run now. And also the
yeah,
ways in people's, you know, behaviors have shifted. The number of stores, you know, look at M&S, for instance, we've seen so many retail stores close, and it's
yeah,
a tragedy, but at the same time, it's moving in the direction of, you know, this modern world that we live in. And on the flip side of that, I think one of the things we saw really come through, particularly in the FMCG category, is people really investing in local.
yeah,
So people loving, supporting, you know, their local butchers or their local wine shop. And I think that's going to be a real nice behavior to
yeah,
watch. Is
yeah.
that going to stick? What does it mean for the underdogs? How are the kind of established brands going to speak
It's an
to you?
interesting combo, isn't it? Because you've got this real push for online, so people thought, oh, well, that's the locals screwed, but it's not. Yeah, I agree. I think you've got, you know, yeah, you're buying more online, but you're also venturing out that just in your locality and supporting. You know, I know a lot of friends, and definitely myself, you know, in that sort of, definitely in that first sort of 3 or 4 months before we were allowed back in the office, I was purposely driving to the local stores, spending more than ever, just praying that they're still going to be here in 6 months. And I think a lot of people have, and obviously a lot of them have done very well, which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been really lovely as well. I live in a community that is essentially somewhat on a main road and a high street, and apart from when we went out to clap for the NHS, we never really introduced ourselves. And now I know at least 5 of my neighbours' names.
Yeah.
I know the guy who owns one of the wine shops down the road. I
Andy?
know the backstory to the shop, and now I'm super, you know, whenever I walk past him, I'm always so pleased to like pop in and help support him and his family, who are, you know, who've set that up, and
Yeah.
that's their bread and butter.
Yeah.
So
That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So we've got the local side, we've got the e-com side, and, you know, a lot of different things there. So what do you think will be the next big thing for brands? Any insights into the sort of some of the patterns you're seeing, that are sort of evolving, and the next big thing?
yeah, if I'm honest, we don't work too closely with trend work, so a little hard for me to say. And I think a lot of it, if I'm honest, will depend on how the next 3 to 6 months pan out, at least in the UK.
Yeah.
You know, with furlough coming to an end and whatnot, I'm sad to say I think we might continue to see the collapse of quite a few businesses. The one thing that I would say, which I think has really been driven by the pandemic, and sadly a lot of people, you know, losing their jobs, is this inspiration for people to start their own businesses, and become entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I feel like I've really seen, kind of almost double in size over the last couple of years, is the rise of any kind of challenger brand.
Yeah.
Um, if anyone who's listening, if you don't know what a challenger brand is, they are essentially the brands who enter a category and look to disrupt. They're usually people who do something quite bold. So as I'm saying this, there might be some immediate examples that spring to mind. And for me, it's always people like EasyJet, who completely disrupted the airline category with budget, prices. It's Ben and Jerry's, who disrupted this luxury premium ice cream category with this real, solid personality, who have these really quirky flavors. And, in the US, they've released like a CBD infused ice cream.
Have they? I've not seen that one.
It's
Wow.
Brewdog who
Yes.
changed what the beer market looked like and what it meant to kind of deliver craft beer. And I think there's a common misconception that challenger brands are startups. They're not. They come in all shapes and sizes, but they are people who are not necessarily focused on what they're challenging, but more focused on who they're challenging, whether that's the customer experience, for instance, or if it's more about I don't know, it's less about category drivers, but more about what they can do to kind of bring something good to the world.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen a lot of that. And I think a lot of people are building businesses that resonate with that. And it's a really exciting time, because it means that a lot of those big established brands that we previously loved are having to adapt quite quickly. And it's quite scary for them.
So a lot of opportunity in reality. At the same time, as obviously a lot of challenges out there. There's a lot of opportunity for up and comings, or like you say, not just the new, but the guys that are willing to sort of step up and do things a little bit differently. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of campaigns you've worked on over the years. What would you say has been the best campaign, and why?
Yeah, so I guess if I rephrase, if you'll allow me slightly, if I rephrase that to what's the best project I've worked on, I've worked on so many that for me have been an absolute favourite. There are a couple that are real standouts for me. There was one project we did for a digital magazine called Refinery 29 back in 2015. They are essentially a women's magazine, and they ran a piece all on what it means to be a woman in this century. And it was one of the most kind of poignant pieces of research we've done, and that I had taken part in. That was very early on at the beginning of my career, but it was so wonderful because we hosted these dinner parties in 4 locations across the world, where we had 10 women come and sit around a table and essentially have cocktails and a little bit to eat. And they were women who were in their 40s and were not mums, and there were women who didn't identify as straight, and there were women who had kids at the age of 16, and there was a real mix of what it meant to kind of be a woman and to be a mother. And it was so refreshing to be a part of that discussion and just see people really kind of drill into the pressures that we feel as women in society, but also the ways in which brands make us feel. And there was something really kind of beautiful that came out of that, because the discussion was just so open and honest. So that for me is a favorite, purely because of, I guess, the methodology. I loved that we were able to get something so rich out of that situation.
Yeah, sounds amazing.
And the second big standout for me is Asahi, who were a client I've worked with for years. So Asahi Superdry, the beer brand. We did a big bit of research for them back in 2018, where they essentially rebranded and relaunched within the UK. When I say rebranded, they didn't rebrand their brand name. They reevaluated their brand positioning, essentially.
Yeah. So
we did a massive bit of research where we looked at who the UK consumer was for Asahi beer. We did a big, a number of kind of strategic workshops where we looked at what the marketplace looks like for them, how they competed with other brands, what occasions they could kind of uniquely own and position themselves in. And we ultimately built this massive brand map for them, where we said, hey, here's a really clear positioning you can pursue. It was remastered by Japan, which was rolled out. It was in all of their advertising. We then, later on went on to kind of help them refine and test that advertising as well. And I think why that's a standout project for me is it was such a massive strategic project for a brand. And it's not often that you get to work on, a repositioning.
Yeah.
It's something that once big brands kind of do, they stick to. And I really admired that they had the guts and the bravery to sit back and go, do you know what we've got isn't currently working quite right. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's look at how we can make this better. And it was a massive success.
It's quite a thing, isn't it? I think you got a lot of sort of long-standing, decades-old brands, and obviously consumer behaviour, the way people buy and see things, is obviously changing all the time, and you can't stick. But it's obviously quite a big thing to obviously change a big brand. I think, was it Carlsberg? Was it Carlsberg? I'm trying to remember now. They had a big change about a year ago, because it's probably not the best beer anymore, because we got a bit, whatever it was, I can't remember exactly. But it was not working for them, was it? They had to do something with it. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really obvious, but it's like when we talk about it, it sounds obvious, but it's funny enough, one of the things I often find myself pushing for in conversations with clients sometimes is for them to be a bit more brave, and for them to challenge where their brand sits, and to reevaluate the market and look at the white space and look at the opportunities and go for that rebrand, or change your packaging or tell a different story. And I think it's hard because sometimes I think a lot of people kind of rely on the laurels almost, or the success of the brand, and it's hard to break away from what was once successful and be scared that wherever you go next might not do the same thing.
That's amazing. I think that's an amazing 45 seconds there. I think people just get stuck in their way and just carry on. But the reality is, you've got to make some changes every now and then. You've got to be brave, as you say. Those gaps in the market that are appearing all the time. Why not? Why the hell not? It's just too easy to keep doing the same thing. And I think if anything's taught us over the last 6 months, well, we can't really do that anymore, because people are coming up, and you've got to adapt. Okay, so why do you think? I think a lot of people listening to the podcast were like, "That's great." Lots of big brand talk potentially, but why do you think the people that are running e-commerce stores, why do you think they should be investing in research? Why is it so important for them potentially? Obviously, there's all different sizes of companies that listen to the podcast, but why do you think it's so important?
I mean, certainly from my perspective, as I kind of mentioned earlier, for me, research really underpins every decision a business makes.
Yeah.
Whether you're relying on data or whether you're relying on the whys, those human truths, I feel like it's so crucial to success. And I think, jumping back to that Asahi example, like, it helps you develop a better business strategy fundamentally. If you're doing research, if you understand what your kind of customer targets, media usage is like, you can invest your advertising spend in a more meaningful way. You're more able to more meaningfully communicate with your target customers. You can look at what your kind of product pricing and distribution strategy looks like. I think there are so many ways in which those insights feed into these decisions that it's just a formula for success. Say, but
I mean, it's you've got to be always researching. I'm a massive believer in it. Obviously, you do it to the 8th degree. It's you're the the 80-20, 80-20, you're the 0.5% that absolutely goes for it. I like to think that we do. We're consistently researching, our branding, our market, our products, our service, and adapting and whatnot. But I think a lot of people, I do see it, a lot of people, just do the same thing, and they just don't change. And then, these just disruptors, as we put it, or, these new people that come through in the market, or existing people that just have a slight rebrand or bring out a new product and align, with what's happening out there, really just take the market share. So I'm a massive believer. So what would you say, I think the last couple of questions, Flick. So what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen brands make?
Oh, good question. Is it too obvious if I say they don't do enough research? There's kind of like an infamous story in market research about Tropicana's, I think it was 2009, 2010 rebrand. They did a kind of packaging redesign, and they had invested about 35 million in the campaign to roll it out.
Wow.
It was terrible, and they ended up losing like 20 million in sales alone. And those figures don't even look to what it cost for them to change, the factory sheet or not to do the reprint. So, it all came down and boiled down to the fact that they didn't really understand the emotional connection people have with their brand.
Yeah.
And that for me is just like the prime example of a really costly mistake.
Yeah.
We live in a world where consumers are super critical of brands now. They're super critical of the experiences that they have. There are these things called moments of truth that customers have in their journey, and if you don't provide them with enough of them, and if you don't leave them with a great kind of final lasting impression of your brand, you see in all of the research we do that they're far less likely to advocate for you. They're far less likely to talk about you with a friend. And I think there's a real, going back to your initial question about mistakes I see, there's a real misconception, I think, sometimes with brands I work with, where they think once they've sold a product, that's the end of the customer journey. And they don't invest in that first moment of truth, particularly in e-commerce, where they've never seen the product they're buying, they haven't touched it in store, they haven't felt it, smelt it, depending on whatever category it is. You know, they haven't, there's been no kind of real tangible product for them to hold. And upon delivery, when they are unboxing that product, that is literally the first moment of truth they have with your brand. And no matter what anyone tells you, it's not online, it's not when they are browsing through your products, that confirms all of the emotions that they felt in the lead up to buying that product, whether or not they made the right decision. And things as small as, you know, what tissue paper your product is wrapped in, what the unboxing experience is like, is there a personal thank you note that you're including? All of these things in amalgamation lead up to, you know, what I would call that first moment of truth. And it's so crucial. And the number of times I see really big brands not even think about that. They kind of think, you know, there are multi-million-dollar businesses that I work with who deliver these products and they lose people straight away.
It's all those touch points, isn't it? So every single touch point, every single experience to do with that brand, it all adds up, doesn't it? These moments, like as you say. And I think the tissue paper in the box, that, you know, when you get that product, you know, that's the part of the deal, isn't it? You know, it's not just the product, it's the box, it's that excitement, you know, that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything before and after. So final question, Flick. We always like to end every podcast with a book recommendation. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be research related, it can be leadership related, marketing related, or it can just be a good old novel. It's anything that you think. I always like to. We're building quite an extensive library for all of our listeners, and so it doesn't matter what it is. What would be your recommendation?
Oh, I'm really torn. So I'm looking at my bookshelf now.
We'll give you two.
Thank you. So generous. Okay, that helps me then. I'm looking at my bookshelf now, and I have to say my all-time favorite novel is A Little Life by Hanya. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'll hear a big siren. Thanks for living in central London. So my book recommendation that's a novel is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. She is a Japanese-American author, and A Little Life is easily one of the most moving books I've ever read. Everyone I've recommended it to says that they love it. It's got the most fantastic character progression that you'll ever see. And it's a real kind of beautiful yet harrowing book at the same time. And she just takes you on this really kind of visceral journey, and it's a wonderful book. My non-fiction recommendation, which kind of actually ties into a lot of what we've been talking about, is called Eating the Big Fish. It's by Adam Morgan, and it's about how challenger brands can compete against brand leaders. He was kind of the pioneer behind the term challenger brand, and he really beautifully just breaks down in this book the different kind of credos that exist, and how different brands have adapted over the years. And there's a lot of kind of real I guess thought-sparking bits of writing in there.
That is on, as soon as we finish this, that they are both on order, and I'll send you an update in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much. That's been an amazing podcast. I'm really looking forward to getting this out there. What would you say to the guys that want to find out more about yourself, more about Tonic? What's the best place to reach out to you?
Oh, nice little plug from me. So if you find me on LinkedIn, that's probably easiest. I'm down under Felicity Adkins, or if you write Flick Adkins Tonic, I should pop up straight away. Just drop me a message. Going back to what I was talking about, you know, kind of fostering client relationships, I'm always happy to jump on a really quick call if anyone has kind of initial burning questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, always happy to help.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been a blast. Thanks very much.